to start with. The first item being in relation to the fact that we are recording this meeting and the meeting will be uploaded to the website following the meeting. For all those members on the committee, could you please keep your mics and your cameras on? For those who are not members of the committee, could you please keep your cameras and your mics off until you're invited by the chairman to speak? With regards to speaking, could you please use the hands up facility if you need to speak, or if you are a member of the committee and you're on camera, you can obviously raise your hand and the chairman can see that. Or if there are connection issues and you do have issues, you can use the chat facility. If you do have any connection issues during the meeting, please get in touch with me via email or telephone, and because obviously I will be off camera and I can mute my mic, so please do so if you need to, and I can get an Office of Democratic Services to help you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Karen. Okay, we're now going to go on to the main items of the meeting. First of all is apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies for absence?
Councillor John Thomas has advised that he will try to make the meeting, but if he can't, could we please tender his apologies?
Thank you. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on 16th December. Are you happy for me to sign them off?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, any declarations of interest? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It's just with regards to item 5, which is the Local Government and Elections Wales Bill. Some of the points in that item in particular are regarding town and community councils, and I'm a member of Barry Town Council as well as the Vale Glamorgan Council. As we've said on many occasions before, we have dispensation to remain in the room on issues which are regarding issues relating to both. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, can I just clarify? You probably have, because obviously it's the same for me, and I would have thought I would have dispensation to speak and vote on that sort of discussion, although it's unlikely we will have a vote, but I just wondering for clarification, Karen, bear in mind what Councillor Johnson just said.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Any other members?
Yes, Chair.
Members of town and community councils?
Chair, it's Vince Driscoll, obviously on the community council of Dennis Parish.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And me, Rob Crowley, as well.
Okay, anyone else who's a member of town and community councils? George Carroll?
No, Chair, I'm not.
Okay, Councillor John? Can't hear you, Councillor John. You're muted. You're still muted, Councillor John. Yeah.
Okay. I'm a member of Lantern Major Town Council, and I've got dispensation to speak on town, community councils, and Vale Glamorgan.
Okay, and Councillor Cox.
Yes, I'm a member of Cowbridge with Llanbrethian Town Council. Also have dispensations.
Chair, I'm a member of Barry Town Council, likewise.
Okay, and I am a member of Penarth Town Council and likewise as well.
Chair, can I just mention, I noticed Debbie put her hand up. I just wondered
She
if Debbie
did,
wanted
but she
to
did
make a
take
comment.
it down, so
Okay.
I don't know if Debbie, do you want to make a comment at all?
Yes, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously, the action plan, which is attached to the report relating to the bill, provides information, and it is primarily for noting. As members have rightly pointed out, it does refer in certain areas to those provisions which specifically relate to town and community councils, and what I am proposing to do is to take that to the joint liaison committee and circulate the report at a later stage to the town and community council, so it will be picked up separately and relayed to those other bodies.
Okay, I've still got 2 raised hands at the moment. Councillor Cox and Councillor John. Are they old hands or are they new hands?
Gone.
They're both gone. Okay then, thank you very much. All right, then now move to number 4. I think Leif will present this on the annual corporate safeguarding report.
Yes, thank you,
Chair.
Yeah.
That's right.
I shall present this. Is it okay if I share my screen? Because
yes,
the
please.
report on here is probably easier to go through that. So hopefully any second, you should be able to see the report.
Yeah.
As you say, this is the annual safeguarding report. This report is actually presented to probably all the scrutiny sort of committees, because obviously there's various sections to it, and I think obviously what we do at this particular committee for performance and resources is just concentrate on the managing director and resources section, which actually relates to the safer recruitment policy, which is a part obviously that I'm responsible for within the HR function. So obviously we're going to skip quite a few pages of this report and actually move to page 21, which is the managing director and resources section. If you're happy for me to explain from that section onwards.
That's fine.
Okay. So obviously this does deal with our safer recruitment, which is obviously key in terms of obviously our recruitment activities within the council, and that's throughout the council within, again, mainly within our social services teams, schools, anyone really who's working with vulnerable adults or children, and making sure obviously that we're recruiting effectively within those sections. Just a bit of a headline figure, I suppose, early on in the report, that actually compliance has improved from the previous year, increasing from 96% to 98%. Always good news that it's going in that direction. It does show still that there were 8 breaches in terms of safer recruitment during 2019-20, which again we'll go into a bit more detail shortly. So if I just move to table 1, which is the breakdown in terms of rates for the council as a whole, so in terms of sort of corporate figures and schools joined together, and that explains the increase again from 96 to 98%, and then it shows the difference again between the number of new starters that we had under safe recruitment. So during that financial year we had 464 new starters that we processed, and so 456 were compliant, and they say only 8 that we had weren't. And actually the data which we'll show in a couple of tables, the 8 of the non-compliance were all in schools. There were no corporate processes that had that non-compliance, which again we'll go into some detail shortly. Okay. Right. So table 2. So this is again just data just for schools. So during the year we recruited 252 posts within that safe recruitment period, and again it shows again that figure of 8 for that non-compliant. But actually when you compare that to the previous year, again we've actually increased from 93 to 97% for schools, which again is a really good figure. Once again, I would like to see it 100% for both, to be honest, but again also we are working with that and obviously working in the right direction. Okay, and then table 3, which is obviously quite a straightforward table and probably don't need to spend much time on this, is the corporate data. So again that will be our social services teams mainly, some sections within our sort of learning skills teams that require sort of DBS checks and so on, that we actually had 100% compliant during the year as well, which is obviously good news. It might be worth just mentioning, I suppose now, why we had those breaches, but I suppose why a breach would occur. Obviously someone starting that needs to have be part of that safer recruitment process, is that we actually need certain checks in place before they start, and those checks could be anything from obviously DBS disclosure, references from say their recruit process, medical assessment, and sometimes if they don't have any of those and the manager or the school want them to start, then of course we're able to complete a risk assessment to see whether it would be, I suppose, wise to let them start without those checks in place. Now sometimes managers will say, well actually we've got the DBS, we've got the medical, we've got one reference, and actually all we're missing is just one reference. So we actually can make a decision with the manager or the head teacher and so on to say, actually, with the risk assessment in place, we're happy to start them on that. And in a way that wouldn't be classed as a breach, because we've made an informed decision. Those breaches we're talking about generally would mean that one of those checks weren't in place, and the managers just made the decision to start them, prior to us having that sort of clearance, which is why out of those 450 appointments that we have those eight breaches. What we do with those breaches actually is actually, I suppose we could argue, give a 12-week deadline in terms of getting any of those checks in place completed. 12 weeks sounds a long time, and actually generally, obviously when we put breaches like that in place, those things that are missing, whether it's a DBS, a reference or a medical, we get responses back fairly quickly. We've only had one case, I think, that's actually gone sort of, quite into that sort of time scale. So what we end up doing is actually on weeks 8, 10 and 12, we actually escalate those breaches, which I suppose from a school's perspective would be our head, or it could be managing director, but it goes to Paula Ham, learning skills, head of service. And it will also go to the head teacher and governing body if it ever gets to those stages of breaches between those periods. And what we end up doing again is, if after the 12 weeks and we still haven't had that sort of final sort of confirmation, whether it's a DBS, a reference or medical, then we've got actually an opportunity then to dismiss that member of staff because they haven't got the checks in place. And obviously it's very rare, as you say, we actually get to that stage, because obviously that gets to become quite serious on why they started in the first place and why we haven't had those checks made. But it's just to prove, I suppose, we've got those escalation processes in place to make sure that it doesn't continue for months and months, sort of on end. I think again it's worth mentioning, as part of our sort of checking processes, the benefit that we had of going down the route of the DBS checks going online. They call it actually the DBS e-bulk system. Interesting title, but actually what that's enabled us to do is to get checks through, which used to be one of our longest I suppose issues of trying to get these new starters in, was because of the length of time it took for DBS checks to come in. Anything from 6 to 8 weeks in a sort of average time scale, where now the majority of our DBS checks actually come within anything from 24 to 48 hours. And I was actually looking at data the other day, and actually our quickest return was actually within 7 hours of sending off a request. Some are longer, it depends on their circumstances, and again the benefits of having it online, even obviously during the last 9-10 months of the pandemic, has meant that we've been able to continue undertaking these checks sort of going forward, and able still to manage the processes of our safer recruitment, and again that's been a real benefit, again especially in the last few months. And then finally, actually, we just had news only towards the end of last week that we were actually audited by the DBS themselves, and we actually passed their annual audit, which is always good news, because again that proves again that we're doing things correctly. We've got the correct processes in place, and we're also able to offer our services externally to any organisations that can't do DBSs themselves because they don't process enough. So we're taking on additional business to undertake those checks as well. So I know that's a sort of a brief sort of I know it's a bigger report, but I suppose that's the main section that we deal with. And again, hopefully it shows that we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully we'll hit 100% for both schools and corporate at the same time, which is what we're aiming for. So I'll stop sharing that now, and again over to questions from anyone.
Thank you very much, Leif. Okay, I think I got Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leif, for the presentation. Obviously, as you say, it's only one part of the 4 sections of the report. There, that's great. I was going to congratulate you. It's a movement from 96 to 98%. That's a very high number. I was just a little bit, just have a note of caution from the narrative that you provided, which is essentially that there are 8 people for whom we have in the school system for whom the documentation wasn't in place or a risk assessment in place.
Yeah.
And I was just looking to get a flavour from you as to, well, how many people are going through the system and given a risk assessment rather than have all the documentation in place. And also really just that still, I think I was a little surprised to just really get that feeling of there are 8 people that schools have felt comfortable in starting without the documentation or a risk assessment. And I'm just wondering where that goes, because it feels to me I'm very happy to see a 98% figure. I'm less happy to see conceptually that the schools are happy to have starters without a risk assessment, and I don't know where that conversation really goes. Just on a slight tangent, obviously this is the annual report for 2019-20, and we are in qualitatively different set of circumstances for 2021. Obviously we're near the end of that as a year. I'm just trying to understand whether the information that here is meaningfully rolled over for comparison and useful for this year, and if there are lessons from this year that we should know about in advance. Because if we're not getting an annual report until 10 months after the end of the year, then I think there's a way of speeding that up slightly. Thanks.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think you're quite right. I think in terms of, obviously we've told you about the 8 breaches, but actually you're quite right. I think it might be worth showing that split in terms of what risk assessments have been put in place, even though obviously that becomes a valid reason for them starting. I think, yeah, we can look at adding some of that data. If I can get that information, I can share that with members, again later on this week.
That'd be good if you could.
Yeah. Again, I think yes, you're quite right. In terms of those eight schools, it turned out actually it was actually seven schools altogether, because actually one school had 2 breaches. I didn't want to go into too much detail, obviously, at this stage, who they were and on what they are. But obviously, we were in discussions with those schools at quite a high level, with the head teacher and the governing body. And you're quite right. This does, obviously, these breaches do happen, and it's something that we try and deal with. Sometimes it's new people in roles that may not have understood sort of the processes, because generally the schools understand these processes and risk assessments in place. So sometimes it's more of a communication issue, and sometimes again we talk about risks of DBSs and those sort of things, and I would say, looking at it, probably the DBS is the least thing that the breaches are for, which is probably a good thing. It's generally due to a missing medical or a missing single reference. So if you got the DBS and the main reference and other pieces, then generally probably the school will think, oh well, that's fine. We can deal with that. Obviously, in terms of teachers themselves, they obviously have to register with the EWC, Education Workforce Council, that also have a DBS check as part of that process. So sometimes there's a bit of a fallback sort of position, but of course we've got to be careful with that, because DBS checks aren't transferable between organisations, which is why we have to undertake them ourselves as well. I mean, again, they're only as good as the time that you actually undertake them. So, but I think you're right. I think it's something we need to work with schools more. I would like to see obviously 100% sort of rate at the end of the year, because that's what we should be aiming for. What we will do, I think, as you quite rightly mentioned, so we're looking at a 2019-20 report, and we're already in, is a January 21. I appreciate this is a wider report, which is probably why it gets sort of caught up in all the other bits. But maybe again, it's something we can provide data sort of earlier on. I'm aware of the data already from April sort of onwards again, which is looking fairly good as well. But again, we can look at maybe providing that data a lot sooner, because it probably is easier because we're doing it on a monthly basis rather than just doing an annual report. But I'll discuss with colleagues on the best way to provide that to you.
Thank you for that. To any other member? I haven't got any raised hands. Okay, I'm going to raise a couple of points then. You mentioned the 12 weeks there. I mean, admittedly, you did say that 12 weeks is the top deadline if you think about it, and there would be serious issues going beyond, say, week 8. I just wondered, perhaps, should we scrap 12 weeks and introduce something like 6 weeks, for example, especially when it comes to teachers, because 6 weeks to me sounds a lot safer than 12. I just wondered how many people you would have outstanding after 6 weeks in any case. Yeah.
I think
I wouldn't mind your justification for saying 12 rather than 6 weeks. And the second question I'm going to ask is about training for new head teachers or people responsible for those issues of recruitment. Obviously, what sort of training do they undertake in order to make sure they do the risk assessment and the safeguarding properly and other safe recruitment methods?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The reason I think initially the 12 weeks was brought in because that matches the probation period of the new members of staff.
Okay.
So it almost dealt with, I think, that process of, well, you've got 12 weeks to prove yourself, and actually that becomes part of your probation. I'm aware actually out of those 8 cases, it was I think it was one that hit the 8 weeks. All the others actually were under. But again, we can maybe clarify that data a little bit more sort of in future reports just to make that a bit clearer. I think at this stage we'll probably stick with the 12 weeks just because it does match probation quite well, and it deals with that end of employment issue sort of the employment matter. And you're quite right again in training. We do offer obviously support with our recruitment selection training as well, and we also do separate safeguarding and DBS training as well for any new members of staff that are coming in that have got recruitment as part of their role. So again, maybe that's something we need to pick up probably better with schools possibly, and that's where maybe the issue lies. But again, we can have that discussion within our teams within schools.
Thank you very much. Open to any other member. Okay, I think we're happy now. Thank you very much for that, and we note the report and the comments. Thank you very much. We now move on. I think we got a presentation now, I understand. Okay. So Rob, are you doing a presentation on local government elections, Wales?
Yeah, I've asked, Rob, shall I ask Matthew Swindell to put it up? Yeah, Matthew's going to put it up for you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. What I will do, I'll start off on this if I may. Fine. And then you'll note from the report that went to Cabinet before Christmas that's being referred on to you tonight that there's an action plan attached, and Debbie will come in and deal with that action plan if that's okay.
That's fine.
So if we move to the next slide, please, and the next one. The report sets out a summary of the Local Government and Elections Wales Bill, and it sets out what the key issues are for us as a council moving forward. Now, most members on scrutiny will have heard of this bill over time. We've been consulted on the content of it previously, as well as other various white and green papers. So the first thing to say is it's a significant piece of legislation. It covers reforming the electoral system, It covers issues relating to public participation, the way councils are governed, and also the performance of councils, and also deals with issues around regional collaboration. And one of those issues is the introduction of corporate joint committees, which is subject to the next report on this agenda this evening. So the bill was introduced back in 2019. It was passed by the Senedd on 18th of November, and it's anticipated that the bill will receive royal assent early this year. And it will replace the current improvement duty for principal councils that's set out in the Local Government Wales measure of 2009. The concept behind the bill and the guiding principle behind the bill is that basically we have a more streamlined approach to performance, governance and improvement. And the intention of the bill is that council should be proactive in considering how processes and procedures should change to deliver better outcomes and better decision making. So I don't know, I've stopped. If we go on to the next slide, please. So in summary, and I'll go through these because this is in effect a repeat of what's on the report before members. Key areas of the bill. The first one, reforming electoral arrangements. You can see there are 5 bullet points under that topic, and the most publicised one is the extending the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds in Wales. There's also the ability for individual councils to choose a voting system, whether it be first past the post or a single transferable vote system. A change in electoral cycle from principals council for 4 years through to 5 years. Allowing non-politically restricted council staff to stand for election in their own authority, but then with a caveat that they should resign from their role if they are elected, and the removal of returning officer fees for local elections. There's also an introduction of general power of competence, which has been well publicised. There's also another area of the bill which looks at reforming public participation in local government. We will have a duty to produce a strategy on public participation, duty to make a petition scheme. There will be a responsibility on us to broadcast certain meetings, and there will be an allowance for flexibility around members being able to attend meetings remotely. That's an interesting one because, as we can see tonight, we're already doing that because of the pandemic. So I would argue we've got a good track record of doing that over recent months. So if we move on to the next slide. There's also reforms around democratic governance and leadership, which is a big chunk of the bill as well. So one of the issues is the appointment of a chief executive rather than something that's currently called a head of paid service with specific duties for that chief executive. There's the ability of councils to appoint assistants to cabinets or introduce job sharing for cabinet members. There's the updating of family absence provisions in line with those available to employees of organisations. And there's then an issue around requiring leaders of political groups to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members of their group. Collaborative working we'll come on to on the next agenda item. The key area here, and this is quite a chunk of the bill, is to establish corporate joint committees covering specific functions. I won't say any more about that at the moment because we are coming on to it on the next agenda item, other than to say that the bill covers 4 service areas around economic well-being, transport, strategic planning and school improvement. And the only other thing I'd say at this stage is those are functions that are already being undertaken regionally as well as locally across Wales. And then the other area of the bill is around reforming performance regimes, and that as well is on the agenda as a separate report. And the reason those two items are on the agenda is because members will note we've got consultations on those two areas. And finally, there are powers to facilitate voluntary mergers of councils. So those of you who cast your minds back to the Williams Commission and all the work that was undertaken previously, what the bill will allow is for councils to merge if they so wish, subject to making a bid through to Welsh Government. Next slide. So that brings us to the end of the overview of what's in the actual bill itself. The purpose of the report that was presented to Cabinet alongside the consultation reports on corporate joint committees and performance was to set a context so that members, when they consider those two reports, could see the context in terms of the local government and elections bill. And I would suggest that's the same reason why it's come here this evening, so that members have that background and that context when you do consider the corporate joint committees and the performance consultation. The second reason why it was brought to Cabinet and also here tonight is to give members confidence that we do have an action plan in terms of implementing the measures that are going to come out of the bill, and that action plan is appended to the report before you tonight. And I know Debbie is ready to take you through that action plan or to highlight any specific points that members may have or may want to raise. So that's it from me, Chair. Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Debbie, do you want to
Yes, yes. Yeah, so the action plan, as Rob has mentioned, is presented so that obviously members are aware of what is being proposed. It is a large piece of legislation with various timelines for the various aspects coming into force. And because of that, it's felt that we needed to have an action plan so that we could assure obviously members of how we were dealing with those matters. So the action plan, as is before you, sets out the various provisions, the actions as we've identified at this stage, but of course it is going to be a living document, so it will evolve through time and obviously it will be supplemented. And we've also identified responsible officers, but there will be an overarching working group, so we'll make sure from a strategic perspective that the work is flowing and that there aren't any sort of obstacles there. And then the all-important final column to give members and also a focus for the working group and the officers dealing with these matters an indication as at today's date as to where we are with regards to certain aspects coming into force. And as is set out in the report and in the action plan, a number of aspects come into force upon the bill becoming an act, receiving royal assent, other aspects within 2 months, and other aspects at the and following the next local elections in May 2022, and then a significant number of the provisions when Welsh ministers exercise their powers to bring those into force. So it really is quite a sort of a complex sort of arrangement for the elements of the Act coming into force. Of course, we are also going to be raising awareness with town and community councils, and that's in line with our charter, and with a report going to Joint Liaison Committee, but also sharing the information with clerks and chairmen of town and community councils. There's also some aspects which relate to Standards Committee, and again a report will be going to Standards Committee this month so that members are cited on the requirements and what will become responsibilities for the Standards Committee, and so that the Standards Committee can address any training needs associated with that. I'll run through a quick overview of some of the aspects. I am conscious it is quite a detailed action plan. If members wish me to do that, I'm more than happy to highlight some of the key points. If you're happy with that.
I think, to be honest, I think with the action plan, it's on Appendix A on the report. I mean, it's pretty extensive and major, but I would like to theme it. So first of all, I'd like to look at elections first of all.
Absolutely.
So if you think about the themes, first of all, we got 16 to 17-year-olds eligible to vote and qualifying for foreign citizens.
Absolutely.
See section 2. Could you tell me more about the foreign citizens? Well, how's that going to work?
So this will relate to foreign citizens that reside within the various local authorities throughout Wales, and those who are permitted to reside and don't require any permissions to reside. So they will automatically qualify to be able to register and also to vote. So I think the key point to raise with regards to those provisions and the extended provision of 16 and 17-year-olds for local elections and local referendums is that there's an entitlement to be registered, but the entitlement, and that comes into force 2 months after royal assent, which is expected this month. But the entitlement to vote, which is key, that doesn't come into force until on or after the 5th of May 2022. So
okay,
as
I think Councillor Carroll wants to come in. Do you want to come in on that point, Councillor Carroll, about elections relating to young people?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. And thank you for the presentation so far, Debbie. I appreciate that this is something that would have been in the pipeline anyway, vis-a-vis the Senedd elections. It's just a question really in relation to 16 and 17-year-olds, foreign nationals voting, etc. The rules are obviously going to be different in council and assembly Senedd elections compared with general elections, and the result of that will be the council will need to maintain 2 electoral rolls. Now, maintaining 1 electoral roll is a pretty mammoth task, I think most people would accept. So the question would be on that, how is the council doing on that front? Has extra resource been required, and are there further things that are going to be needed moving forward?
Thank you. Well, we are managing within our existing resources, so I'm pleased to advise. And of course, we are currently sort of taking this forward with regards to the Senedd elections. So, we are, I suppose, having that opportunity of running with this for the Senedd elections. So certainly from electoral registration officer perspective, I don't have any concerns in that regard. We're mindful of the timescales, and obviously we're adhering to those.
I think Ruba's got a question. She's put on the chat, but I think I'd rather have it going through the dialogue. So, Ruba, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, all I was going to say, Debbie, is that presumably Welsh Government are legislating this now post-Brexit because EU citizens could always vote in local elections previously anyway. So we're legislating now to sort of safeguard that, I'm assuming, or Welsh Government are legislating to safeguard that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So it is. So
what I'm saying is we're used to already. Those people can, as of the last local elections, they could vote anyway. But we're now safeguarding this. Welsh Government are safeguarding this in legislation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Shall I run through the other provisions, Chair? So
yeah, do you want to go through the voting systems? The electoral cycles, yes please, on the elections, that'd be good.
Okay, and also just to flag up, duty to promote awareness of registration, so a lot of energy going into that, as you would expect. Also worth highlighting that from the 6th of May 2022, the Principal Council will have the ability to decide locally on the voting system. Until a council decision is taken, and there are certain requirements as to what needs to be done prior to such a council decision and the threshold of votes. The first past the post voting system that we're familiar with will continue to apply, but there is also the opportunity to change that voting arrangement, so we could have a single transferable vote arrangement, and again that would be from the 6th of May 2022, so that would follow the next local government election. The next point I wanted to highlight is the change within the bill to the electoral cycle for principal and community councils. So that takes the electoral cycle from 4 to 5 years, and that comes in 2 months from royal assent. The next area that I wanted to highlight relates to the general power of competence, and that gives the power to principal.
Can we before we go there, Debbie, has anyone got any other questions in relation to elections? No, we can carry on by all means to general levels of competence.
Lovely. So I just wanted to mention that it gives a power to principal councils and eligible community councils to do anything in effect that individuals can generally do, subject to limits. So there are limitations which are set out within the bill, and it's anticipated that part of the bill will be introduced from the 2022 local government elections. So it's not anticipated to come in prior to that. And I mentioned that it'll also apply to eligible community councils. So there are provisions within the bill which define what equates to an eligible community council. So hence we'll be sharing that under our charter through the Joint Liaison Community Council with town and community councils, so that they are aware of what they would be required to do to be able to have that eligible power of general power of competence.
Has anyone got any questions about that? Okay, I have. Obviously, you know, and I've already declared an interest being a Penarth Town Council member, but I just think this is very important. I just wonder what sort of help and facilities will it be the Principal Council, e.g. the Vale Council, or will it be the Assembly in assisting these town and community councils to achieving the level of competence?
Yes, I suppose that is a matter for the individual town and community councils to have regard to the criteria. I mean, the criteria is that 2/3 of the members are elected. So that's the first criteria. The clerk is to hold a qualification which may be specified by Welsh ministers, and the community council is to have had at its latest audit an unqualified set of accounts. So those are the key provisions. So obviously there are certain matters there that are very much with the town and community council to have regard to, obviously, you know, it's a matter for the town and community councils to have an awareness of what those thresholds are.
And they can probably find that out through SLCC, Society of Local Clerks.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly at this stage, the qualification hasn't been specified by Welsh ministers, but I know that there are various training programmes for clerks which they attend, and I would have thought and I would have expected that the Welsh ministers' direction in this regard would be consistent with the type of courses which are currently available. I know a number of town clerks certainly do attend courses and have actually secured qualifications. I could see Councillor Gwyn John's hand up there, and I know that Ruth Quinn has also secured a qualification.
Does that answer your question, Gwyn, or have you got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Mr. Chairman, that some councils are very well equipped. I mean, for example, a community council, let's talk about a community council, Landmaze Community Council, their clerk is Carol Alexander. So vast experience at our level, at county level. So, you know, if it really depends on the clerk and where they've had the experience. Now, you've got some community councils and they're nothing more than village committees, and basically there's not enough of them. There's not a full council. And I think the danger of all this, you know, is that, you see, I mean, Cardiff haven't got community councils, I don't think. Only one area, possibly, or two areas.
I think there's four.
Four, there we are.
Painter, Radda, Morganstown together, Lisvane, St Fagans. I think it's about four.
Yeah, the outside, yeah. But I mean, you take it, the number of community councils, the danger with this, you know, is that you've got to consider that these people are not getting paid. They don't want to get paid. Their interest is in community. Yeah. I mean, offering people money for being on councils, Lantford Town Council, all the town councillors are not interested. They just kick it off straight away. And I mean, you can try. I can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, it's very important that you retain this village community aspect, because if you try to squeeze people too much, they won't bother, and that's going to be defeating what we're all about, you know. I mean, yes, Lantford Town Council, all the staff on courses. I mean, there's 4 of us from the Vale Council on the Town Council, like Penarth, yourselves, you know. I mean, but I don't want to see these community councils squeezed out. They've got to be encouraged and helped more than driven. Thank you.
Okay, I think, Debbie, do you want to come back on that? You've got your
Yes, thank you. I think it's important just to have regard that, you know, this is in the context of, you know, the town community councils having this additional power. So it's they would have to meet those qualifying criteria to be able to have the general power of competence. So, you know, it basically means that they would continue as is without the general power of competence unless they can meet those criteria.
I think Jeff wants to say something as well. Jeff Cox.
Yes, very briefly, I think the introduction of this measure could precipitate the amalgamation of these smaller community councils.
I think that's a valid comment as well. Okay, if we now move on, do you want to move on, Debbie, to promoting access to local government?
Yes, thank you. So part 3 deals with promoting access to local government. This is also a provision which is will await a date to be appointed and introduced by Welsh ministers. But to give you a flavour, it deals with the duty to encourage local people to participate in local government decision making, prepare and publish a strategy on encouraging people to participate, duty to make and publish a petition scheme and review the scheme from time to time, publish a constitution, which we already do, and a guide to accompany the constitution. So it'll be a sort of a layman's terms summary of the key provisions, which we don't at the moment, but albeit we do have an index that accompanies our constitution, electronic broadcast of meetings to be open to the public, and also to make and publish arrangements for remote attendance. So those are some of the key points that I wanted to just draw out of the of part 3 of the Act. With regards to some of the provisions towards the end of part 3, regulations about conduct of local authority meetings and documents relating to meetings and publication, they require Welsh ministers to introduce regulations also. So we're waiting for those dates, albeit within the bill it does provide that the provisions in sections 50 and 51 do take effect from the day after royal assent, but from reading the those particular sections, it gives the power for regulations to be introduced. So just so that there's an awareness that it's not a case of as of the end of January, those provisions automatically take effect.
Okay, anyone got any questions on this area? I've got a question. Okay, about electronic petitions. I know that some, you've got lots of organisations like Change UK and everything else has a lot of these systems in place already. Is Welsh Government thinking of, if you reach a certain number of people sign a petition, then we got to discuss it as a council? Are we looking at anything like that, or is it going to have the same power like a request for consideration? I'm just wondering what they're thinking at all, Debbie, on this.
That there isn't a number threshold. I mean, basically what the bill provides is that the Principal Council is required to introduce and publish a scheme, and that also extends to electronic e-petitions, and it provides that a petition scheme must in particular, so these are the minimum requirements, it can be broadened, but must in particular set out how a petition may be submitted to the council, how and by when the council will acknowledge receipt of a petition, the steps the council may take in response to a petition received by it, circumstances, if any, in which the council may take no further action in response to a petition, and how and by when the council will make available its response to a petition to the person who submitted the petition and to the public. So there's a requirement for a scheme, but then obviously underpinning that will be the requirement when a petition or e-petition is received to do those follow-up action points in respect of the petition.
Thank you. I got no one indicating on that. Okay.
Okay, so part 4 of the Act, as Rob's touched upon, that deals with local authority executives, members, officers and committees. And as I say, Rob's already mentioned about the appointment, change of job designation from managing director and head of paid service to chief executive. And that's again a date to be appointed by the Welsh ministers. Albeit part of it comes into force from 2 months from royal assent, and that's basically making reference to salary, a change, from salary to remuneration. It deals with the power to appoint assistants to cabinet members, and that's again a date to be appointed by Welsh ministers, and also enables job sharing for the leader and cabinet member positions, job sharing for non-executive officers in principal councils, and the Welsh ministers have the power to make regulations in that regard. That provision comes in 2 months after royal assent, but again it gives the power to Welsh ministers to make regulations there. And also just to highlight, with regards to members' conduct, political group leaders to promote and maintain high standards of conduct, with the Standards Committee to monitor compliance with that, and also to provide training. So those are a few points which come within that part of the Act that I wanted to particularly highlight. There's also, power to require local authorities to appoint joint overview and scrutiny committees. So I think that's certainly something that will assist, as you'll appreciate, with regards to our shared regulatory service. At the moment, officers report to 3 different scrutiny committees. So I think the introduction of that provision will certainly streamline the scrutiny process there.
Okay, any members got any questions on this section? Okay, because I have. In relation to obviously areas like job sharing, I mean, obviously it's an interesting area. But what I'm interested also in is that when we do job shares, how does that really occur? in reality? And also, if it's a job share, you know, what can that really mean in terms of making decisions and how it impacts upon the council generally? That's my first question. The second question, it also talks about presiding member of a principal council. What does that mean?
Right. Well, dealing with the first point, with regards to job sharing, there will be further regulations. So I think that the detail in the regulations will pick up those points. And I must admit, which section are you looking at?
I'm looking at the same where it says job sharing non-executive, enabled to make regulations, and the column next to it on the same page is page 8 on the action plan at the top. And it says principal council offers purpose relating to presiding member of a principal council.
Right, and that would be the right. I will come back to that point. Whilst we sort of move on, I'll have a look at the bill and see if it gives any further definition on that particular point. So I'll come back to that point.
That's fine. Okay, I didn't expect you to have all the answers, Debbie, to be honest.
Well, if I didn't have the answer for tonight, I certainly will email members. But yes, you've caught me on that one.
All right, and do you want to move over to part 5 as well now, collaborative working?
Yes. So collaborative working, we're going to move on to that in the next report. Yes. All I wanted to say with regards to collaborative working is that it deals with 2 streams. So there's the powers for local authorities to apply to Welsh ministers to establish corporate joint committees, and that power is introduced day after royal assent, but there's also provisions within part 5 of the bill / act where Welsh ministers
member of the authority.
Yeah.
Do you want to come in on that, Debbie?
Yes, all I was going to say in that regard is the advice which has been given previously was identified as best practice, but obviously we'll have regard to the bill when that comes into force, and obviously make the necessary changes to the constitution at that time.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're on part 7 now on mergers.
Yes, and with regards to part 7, that provides the power for voluntary mergers. So no compulsion there, but voluntary mergers permitted. And also then very briefly moving on to part 8, that deals with various aspects of local government finance, with part 9 picking up a number of miscellaneous points.
Okay, has anyone got any questions on those areas? No. So can we move to CJCs then in terms of the report, or what the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a separate item on the agenda.
Yeah.
So if you're happy for us to move on to that item, yeah. Okay. Again, if that's great that the PowerPoint is now on the screen. So this PowerPoint is in effect all the information that you've got in the report. The only thing that doesn't figure on the PowerPoint is the actual response that has been submitted to Welsh Government, because the timescale for that response has passed. What I would say to members, I'll give you the comfort that in responding, we have advised Welsh Government that it's coming to the Scrutiny Committee this evening, and that if there are any other issues or feedback that emerges, we've reserved the right to send those on separately. So I will go through this slide deck reasonably swiftly, and I'm assuming Chair, that any questions will follow at the end rather than halfway through. But it is a lengthy slideshow, but as I say, I will go through it briefly.
And I think it'd be quite good to go through Appendix A afterwards as well.
That's fine, Chair.
Yeah.
So corporate joint committees have been around for a long time in terms of the concept. That's the first thing that's been that is worth noting. Now, there is a question in the Welsh Government consultation about proposed footprints for corporate joint committees. Now, the footprints that have been put forward by Welsh Government are based on the 4 current City Deal economic growth footprints. So for the Vale, the relevant footprint would be the City Deal, City Region footprint, which is Bridgend across to Monmouth, Vale up to Merthyr, 10 local authorities. There is widespread support across Wales for corporate joint committees as a voluntary model for collaboration, but it's fair to say there has been some concern around the mandation of regional structures, and what is being proposed through the bill is a mandation of those 4 structures. So the 4 areas that are covered relate to economic well-being, transport, strategic planning, and school improvement. And if we go to the next slide, please. So there have already been regulations published to establish corporate joint committees, and those regulations are the subject of the consultation that is before scrutiny this evening. 44 questions in total. So the Welsh Government has indicated that the regulations are draft and they would welcome input, and there's one overarching consultation document which I suggest is what's of primary interest for this council, but there are then separate documents and draft regulations for each of the proposed corporate joint committees. So one for the North Wales growth area, one for Mid Wales, one for South East Wales, which is the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal footprint, and one for South West Wales, which is the Swansea Bay footprint. And then there's an additional set of regulations for general application, which we are awaiting this year, and that will go into more detail in relation to how corporate joint committees will function. So if we go to the next slide. So basically, this slide indicates some of the key details around governance and structures. So they're called committees, they're called corporate joint committees, but the Minister has described them as being part of the local government family. They are going to be separate legal entities from their constituent councils, so similar to combined authorities, and the comparison that's been made, which will be relevant for many members on this committee, is that they're not dissimilar to fire and rescue authorities in that sense. Membership of corporate joint committees will be leaders of individual councils. Corporate joint committees will be able to co-opt other members onto that committee if they choose, either cabinet members or actual partners. And any members who are co-opted on could become voting or non-voting members, subject to that corporate joint committee making that determination. Now, and the other point which Vicky will come on to when she takes you through the SDP report, which is a subject of separate consultation, for strategic development planning, National Park members must also be a member when dealing with that function. So for the Cardiff Capital Region, it takes in a little bit of the Brecon Beacons National Park, for example, at the north. Voting, importantly, it says 1 member, 1 vote. But once established, the corporate joint committee can adopt alternative voting procedures should they wish. So they will come into being with 1 member, 1 vote, irrespective of the population or geographical spread of that individual council. So for South East Wales, you could compare somewhere like Merthyr or Blaenau Gwent with somewhere like Cardiff at both sort of opposite ends of the population spectrum, if you like. They will all have 1 member, 1 vote. But once it's in being, corporate joint committees could change that if they so wanted. If we go on to the next slide. So there, as I say, the consultation is on regulations to establish corporate joint committees. Those 4 areas that would cover: economic well-being, strategic planning, and transport and school improvement. These are wide-ranging areas, and one of the key themes that we have pulled out through the consultation is the need to avoid duplication and the need for corporate joint committees to be truly strategic in those areas and not to duplicate work with the local area. Good example of this would be on economic development and regeneration. So a lot of good work that's happened in the Vale has been at the community level. If you look at some of the work around Barry regeneration, some of the buildings we brought back into use, some of the schemes that have been done locally, the plea we're making in our response is that we don't lose that element of work, because that is very important work being undertaken at a local level. In the same way, you'll have strategic planning being done regionally, but we will still need to retain officers, staff, and the ability to undertake a local plan locally. So that avoiding duplication is an important point, which has been teased out in the response to the consultation. School improvement is part of the bill, but it does not feature as an early priority for Welsh Government, and I would suggest that that is partly down to the fact that there are already school improvement consortia in place across Wales and doing that function on a slightly separate footprint. So I suggest that the reason that is not a priority is because that work is already underway. The other issue to flag up is that Welsh Government could add other functions to corporate joint committees via future legislation. So even though they say that there are 4 areas at the moment, there is nothing to prevent other areas of work being added either by the corporate joint committee with agreement of ministers or by Welsh Government itself. So if we go on to the next slide. Subcommittees, corporate joint committees can set up subcommittees to lead on specific functions. So for example, you could have a specific subcommittee to lead on transport across the region, for example. And that's not dissimilar to work that's already being done at the City Deal footprint already. In the same way as principal councils, corporate joint committees will be subject to the same requirements in terms of setting a budget, in terms of outlining regulations, in terms of having timescales put upon it for setting a budget and for actually agreeing a budget regionally. And councils must pay into that budget on a basis to be agreed by the corporate joint committee. So if we go on to the next slide. In terms of staffing, corporate joint committees must appoint a chief executive, a chief finance officer, monitoring officer, and a chief governance officer. Although the consultation does say that those officers could be standalone officers, or they could be seconded or provided by a constituent authority. So, for example, in South East Wales, the corporate joint committee could decide to appoint individual officers for that role, which are independent of and in addition to the existing councils, or they could merely say, well, there's an authority with a monitoring officer, and that monitoring officer would fulfill the function at a regional level in the same way with a finance officer and a governance officer. There are differing views across Wales as to which approach is best. One of the issues that we have raised in the consultation response, and you will already get the feel from this run through that these can be quite large bodies in their own right, and you could argue that if this is going to make a difference across Wales, if at a strategic level we're serious about making a difference at the economic footprint of the City Deal region, then they would have to be quite large bodies, but that will not come cheap. So there'll be a cost associated to this, and that is one of the main thrusts of our response, is that that cost shouldn't be at the cost of individual local authorities, because that merely goes to dilute the ability of those individual authorities to fulfil their service delivery at a local level. In terms of accountability, corporate joint committees will be accountable via the leaders who sit on it. There will be a statutory decision-making powers in the corporate joint committees, vested in the corporate joint committees, and there will be a requirement for collective responsibility, and there will be a requirement for procedures to be put in place in relation to the way the democratic system will work, in the same way as we will have our own constitution within this organisation. The corporate joint committee would have to have the same. So if we go to the next slide, please. There we are. I've touched on accountability. There'll be a need to look at dispute regulation, disagreements. Corporate joint committees in the same way will need to have overview and scrutiny committees. And there is also an issue within the consultation on timing. There is a requirement that these bodies meet by the end of September 2021. Now, that's not very far away, it's only 9 months away. Although it is less clear as to how quickly the work of the corporate joint committee should ramp up. One of the main issues that we have flagged up as well in terms of timing is that if we're going to do this well and properly, there needs to be a little bit of flexibility, particularly given that all councils across Wales at the moment are dealing with COVID-19 issues and the pandemic and all the recovery issues that are stemming from that. So if we go on to the next item. In terms of funding, the Minister has indicated that she would be prepared to provide setup costs to support corporate joint committees. There is a table within the actual appendices and the consultation documents as to the costs associated with each function, associated with admin costs, building costs, holding meetings. And this slide gives you an indication of what the do-nothing costs are compared to the maximum costs, which is there's about £1 million difference between both. Now, many have challenged this because the corporate joint committee's maximum again comes back to the point that if we are to do this well and to do this properly, then corporate joint committees need the funding associated with them. And again, the key issue that we have stressed is that that should not see that input and financial input be at the cost of individual local authorities, and specifically at the cost of economic development functions, planning functions and transport functions back locally. So if we go on to performance and governance of these, please. Oh, sorry, no, that's
no, not yet.
So
not yet.
That is a very quick run through, Chair. Yeah. And what I have done there, I know you said you'd like to go through the appendix. Yeah. So what I've done there is touched on some of the key issues for us in our response. Yeah. And I'll very quickly summarise those again. Yeah. The first point was an issue of costs and setup costs, and making sure and making the plea that we're not seeing a diversion, if you like, of funding from individual local authorities into corporate joint committees, because that funding that we currently have is important at the local level. We don't want to dilute what we can achieve at the local level. If corporate joint committees are to be truly strategic in their approach and in their nature, then not having that funding diverted away from local activity is even more important, because that local activity just simply won't happen if that's the case. Secondly, if they're supposed to be truly strategic, they need to have the backing, if you like, in terms of the capacity and the resilience to deliver change at a regional level, and that doesn't come cheap and it comes at a cost. The third area is around timing, that this is not the ideal time to be introducing this. Having said that, given that the regulations are what they are, if the timing proceeds as planned, then there needs to be a little bit of flexibility for each area to ramp up as necessary, rather than to hit the ground running, because that's not going to be feasible. And the fourth area is around all the issues around performance and governance, that corporate joint committees should have the ability to put their own architecture around that, and for that architecture not to be prescribed by Welsh Government, but for the individual corporate joint committees to have ownership of that themselves. So that is a summary of what's in the appendix as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Over to members. I know Councillor Green-John indicated his hand some time ago, then followed by Councillor Johnson. So Councillor John first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is a typical Welsh Government stunt to rush into something and not take time. I mean, quite honestly, I don't think they realise that what a dreadful time we're all having at the moment, and those people, particularly with COVID, are having. And subsequently, the earliest they could kick this off, as far as I would say, would be after the next local elections. It would be much more sensible to start this in 2022. Obviously, you've got to prepare before then, but this is a case for me that the Welsh Government failed miserably with the merger of councils. Now they're going to bring these corporate joint committees together. They're going to start off with giving some powers, and they're going to expand these powers. And in the long term, and I won't be around to see it by then, I'm sure, but they will certainly, 4 joint committees will run Wales. They will be the new counties, and the structure underneath will be changed again in due course. So this is, for me, is what is going to happen in the long term, and maybe they'll expand responsibilities to town community councils, train them and expand their duties to take the lower level out of the county councils. This is a major change in local government to come in the future, I'm sure. And quite honestly, I only hope that whatever they do decide, that they will do this sensibly and constructively for the benefit of the taxpayers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor John. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Rob for the presentation. I think I'd like to echo the comments of Councillor John there. This is local government reform by the back door, and it's also being done at pace, because obviously there's Senate elections due to happen in a couple of months' time when their legislative mandate runs out. So they've tried to do this, try to push this through very quickly, and I don't think it's had the broader public consultation that it should have had, or certainly the awareness in public that it should have had. In saying that, obviously from our perspective, we as a council have already had some votes on passing these powers up to a broader regional authority. We had a vote in, was it 2016 or 2017, must have been, about the city deal. We voted since then about the about more regional, what the SDP stands for, the development plan. So with the issues that I have are twofold at this point in time. One is our process of dealing with this, and the other is sort of some of the implications of a corporate body structure. So the first point is to say, with our how we've dealt with this. I think this is an important issue. This consultation was opened at early October. I feel that, and I wrote to Cabinet on this matter when they discussed their consultation response in December. I said that this should have gone to full Cabinet for full council for discussion. What we could have done is to have had sort of a meeting of group leaders to discuss whether there was cross-party political support. and similarly that we could have had an information session similar to the one we're actually having in this meeting, but we could have had that back in December before the consultation conclusion date, and we could have invited all councillors along to that so everybody could understand exactly where we were. Whereas I think we've had a lower attendance, even though it's been done across 2 meetings. I think this is a matter that should have been discussed with everybody. The issues, the concerns that people had, I think around this were well made in the discussions we had around the so the regional development plan. Its issues of collective accountability, being able to opt out of issues when we can say no. There is across the regional, the membership of the of the wider committee, how that ensures that smaller councils and smaller parties within the wider area are appropriately represented. I think those are all issues which have concerned me greatly and have been part of my reluctance to back previous regional proposals in the past. And I still have those questions there now, that that voices of smaller authorities and smaller parties will not be heard and will be trampled over, and I find that anti-democratic. I like the idea of regional working. I prefer that to mass mergers of councils, but I retain concerns that I have about this being steamrolled through, both in the dying days of an administration in Cardiff, and in terms of how it impacts on our working in future, and more consideration needs to be put into it. There was a comment made regarding we've already, I think, passed up, if that's the right phrase, powers on wider economic development, on transport as part of the city deal, and similarly the development issues. I think the education stuff is probably an add-in, because I'm aware that ERU, which is the regional consortia for South West Wales and Mid Wales, has not fared particularly well. So I imagine that's why it's been included, and I don't know whether there's an intention to perhaps look at whether the South Wales consortium and the one that covers Gwent, is that EAS might be better off on a similar regional footing. I don't know, but I do still maintain that there should have been a better form of discussion across all parties before we reached this point here, and also still maintain the concerns that I've had and not been reassured about the wider governance issues. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor John Thomas next, then Ruba afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with the concerns that have been raised by other members, but my one concern would be the time commitment that's going to be necessary if it's going to be leaders that are going to be expected to sit on these committees. I know the time commitment when I was leader and sitting on City Deal, it did take up a lot of time. But if you've got 3 or 4 of these committees on top of City Deal, and you would expecting the leaders to sit on all of them, I don't know when they're going to actually be able to deal with things that are going on in their own backyard.
Okay, Neil, do you want to? I'm going to ask you several questions afterwards, but I think if we get Ruba in next, please, because he's Ruba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm reiterating some of the points already made. Firstly, I do think Wales working regionally is important. I think so. More of sort of city the city regional deal type partnership is really good, and that is something that we should aim to do, because I think that in the end will be better for all of the participants, all the participating authorities. Having said that, I do really want to sort of echo what both Councillor John and Johnson have said. Councillors John and Johnson said earlier, in terms of the wider consultation of this, in terms of with the public, so Welsh Government's consultation with the wider public, that I think yesterday's meeting, Marcus pointed out. Sorry, could you hold on 1 second? I've got a family issue. 1 second. So I'm really sorry.
Chair,
Neil,
sorry,
Neil,
Chair.
do you want to come in now? Because I'm conscious will be maybe some time. So Neil, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair. I think the thing about this is this has been going on and it's been rumbling along for a long time in terms of this. I remember sort of arguing about this in the previous term, and it has been a matter of consultation. Everybody's been aware of it, and to be honest, what people need to remember is while all this consultation was going on, we were in the middle of a pandemic, which was pretty difficult to deal with some of the issues that we were going. But the other thing is, of course, this did come to Cabinet back before December, before Christmas, long before Christmas, and nobody called it in, and nobody requested any meetings. And if anybody requested a meeting, I would have given them a meeting. It was quite clear, as far as I was concerned. There was consultations going out. Welsh Government were pushing it forward. I was having meetings with Welsh WLGA on it. I was having meetings with other leaders across Wales, and we fought our corner in terms of the CJCs and how it would work and how it best could work. The Welsh Assembly Government obviously put it through and is now become well, it's not law yet, but it's been approved by the Senate and likely to become law shortly after. If anybody does want to deal with any issues, then they do sometimes have to ask a question. I'm sorry, but we were kind of dealing with some other issues as well during this period. And as I said, we took it to Cabinet, no one called it in, had an opportunity to do so, and they didn't. And nobody requested a meeting from me either. So I'll say no more than that.
Councillor Johnson, do you want to come back on that? Because you raised your hand.
Well, no one wrote to me. I responded to Cabinet and the meeting of 21st of December, which agreed, as I believe you said in the meeting, and I can't remember, quite looked at it briefly, but you said you were bringing it here. I mean, I wrote to you, and your response was, "We're going to send it there, and we're going to bring it here." I'm trying to work out what you're expecting of me as a councillor here.
Well, as a group leader, I would expect you, if you wanted to have a group leaders meeting, you could ask for it. But the other thing is, it came to the Cabinet, and it could have been called in, and it wasn't.
Okay. And Councillor Thomas, is that a new hand or an old hand, or do you want to come back, Councillor Johnson?
Sorry, Chair, I'm just clarifying here that Councillor Moore is requesting that if I've got any issues, then I call it in officially, rather than even though he's already referred it to another committee for our discussion. Is that how he wants me to act in future? I was under the impression, because previously I was criticised for calling things in when it was going to another committee. But if you're asking me to call something in if I'm not happy with it, then I will do that in future if that is what you're asking me to do, Leader.
Well, all I'm saying to you is if you wanted to have a meeting as a leader of a committee of a group, you can ask for one. Listen, nobody's ever said you couldn't have one, and this isn't as if this thing hasn't been about for a long time, because it has. Regrettably, it's been hanging about for many a long year. And all I can say is, if we've done it wrong, I apologise. But one of the things we did say, because we had to get it into the Assembly, was we said we would make the proviso that if anybody wants any comments, want to change any of it from this committee, they will go back to Cabinet and we will send it back to the Welsh Government. Happy to do that. Happy to do that at any time. But
okay. I think Councillor King wants to come in as well. Councillor King.
if I may just briefly comment, I share a lot of the concerns that others have expressed about these CJCs, but the one thing I do also recognise is there's an issue of capacity and resources within councils to deliver some projects. We've been so starved of funding for so many years that we just don't have the capacity. And I'm reluctantly coming around to the view that the CJC may allow some of the bigger projects to be driven forwards. Although I'm still a little at a loss as to where they're going to find the staff, because to misquote somebody, where the magic staffing tree is, with modestly paid people because of the way that we're limited and how much we can pay, is beyond me. But I just share that for what it's worth. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Open to any other member before I come in. Okay, I've got a few points to make. One of the things, I'm glad the leader is here at this meeting, because I want to ask him about the success of something like City Deal. Because from my perspective as chair of Scrutiny Committee and chair of chairs and vice chairs, as far as I can see, I find City Deal largely invisible. And I'm probably completely wrong about that. But from my perspective, I don't see a great deal of what's going on there in terms of City Deal. Also, we haven't really discussed the scrutiny function of CJCs here either. It hasn't come up in the presentation today. I know it's in the papers, I've seen it, and it's vague at best, I would argue. And really, we need to see some meat on it. We've seen the joint committees and how, in terms of, there are issues with scrutiny committees, scrutiny functions in terms of the shared regulatory services. We know there are issues. And it seems to me that Welsh Government hasn't got its head round how scrutiny works. And I do think that is something that needs to be discussed and needs to be considered in detail, because we haven't got the detail tonight on that. And I just wondered, Debbie's raised her hand, so I wonder if you've got any answer to that, Debbie, at all.
Yes, thank you. Under the draft regs, which are currently out, and it's important to note, it's anticipated there will be further general regs, and I think Rob picked that up in the report. But there is a provision within the schedule to the existing regs, which refers to overview and scrutiny committee, and imposing a requirement for the South East Wales CJC to establish a subcommittee and it sets out the areas for the subcommittee to consider for the standing orders, and there's a requirement under the regs for the CJC to establish their standing orders, and it provides that the standing orders must include provision regulating the manner in which the overview and scrutiny subcommittee exercises its functions. So there's more work that needs to be done there, but there is the sort of the outline of what needs to be covered within the standing orders to address the issue of overview and scrutiny by the CJC.
Okay, thank you for that. I just got a few additional points. Obviously, one of the issues, and I think Councillor John hit the nail on the head really, is this local government reorganisation through the back door. Is the reality is it going to be a top-down, bottom-up approach? And what I mean by that, it's very interesting that in the previous item we discussed the power or competency of smaller councils become more competent, like town and community councils. Will they then take over some functions that the Bell Council has at the moment? And at the same time, will these big committees, which are actually our corporate bodies, will get more and more powerful, and effectively we'll be squeezed in the middle? And that's a real concern that I have, is that you can see a vision maybe in 5 years time or whatever, where perhaps this level of council may disappear, and we still may have two tiers, because we don't really have single tier. I mean, most areas of Cardiff, you rightly said, Councillor John, there is single tier council, but in the Vale, rural places, we have dual tier councils. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, is that really where Welsh Government really wants to end up? Really have very small councils running a lot of mundane things, and the big stuff is done strategically, and in the middle, I don't know what will happen. I just think that's probably the vision that is going forward here. And, you know, and I think a lot of us have huge concerns over that. And also the other thing that hasn't been raised here is about these corporate bodies, the bureaucracy that's going to be running that as well. We haven't discussed the financial areas of that, like the accounts, the auditing of these bodies. You know, there's lots and lots of things to discuss, yet at the same time, they only get done by September. How realistic is that? Good question mark, really, isn't it? So, I mean, these are my observations and questions, but I do think perhaps, you know, we need to be looking at those and make these comments forward to Welsh Government. Councillor John, do you want to come in on that? And then Rob after that?
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that as far as I'm concerned, Welsh Government haven't got a clue what local government really does. And I think they showed with their merger plans. And they've come up with this expanding this idea, which had started, as members said, some while ago. Now they're going to expand this. They think they've got the answer to everything. And I mean, quite honestly, putting this tight time scale on these things is absolutely ridiculous. It just shows to me that they just are so incompetent that they do not understand local government. It's as simple as that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Rob, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, just conscious of a lot of remarks have been made. I just wanted to come in and give you a bit of a round.
Sure, that's fine.
As I see it, if that's okay. I think the first thing we need to remember is that much of this work is already being done regionally. So if you think about Cardiff Capital Region City Deal, that's economic development, economic well-being. That's got a, excuse me, that's got a transport slant to it already. School improvement is another one that's already being done regionally. Strategic development planning, there is already a desire for strategic development plans that's already legislated for, and at the moment that is something that the Cardiff Capital Region would be looking at under the City Deal umbrella. So I think the first point is there is a direction of travel in this set of regulations that is already in existence. Councillor Thomas made a really good point, which again I should have mentioned because we have actually referred to that in our response, that if you look at 10 leaders for Cardiff Capital Region, they are already exceptionally busy working on and by being leaders of their individual authorities, and they are also expected to lead on basically corporate joint committees as well. So that's another point that we flagged up, and I'm grateful to Councillor Thomas for raising that because it reminded me that that is something we've already teased out in our response. And the same applies for officers, because you will have a report soon on this agenda on strategic development planning. You know, there will be an expectation for officers to pick that up regionally, whilst the same set of officers will be picking up local planning back at a local level. So the points that people have made about staffing and cost and duplication, I wanted to give you the comfort that that was already coming out in our response. Is it local government reform by another way? I would argue that it isn't, simply because it's in addition to, not instead of. And also, going back to the point that I've already made, that the direction of travel already exists here, and a lot of these functions are already being undertaken regionally. It's almost a case of formalising what is already happening. The concern is that there will be an industry around that, and that there will be a cost.
I think the concern that I have, Rob, cutting in on that, is that the additional powers right as well by Welsh ministers. That's what I have a real concern over. So they can add functions to these.
Yes, they can. You're right. That is something that exists, and it's something that's also at the ability of individual corporate joint committees can ask for additional powers as well. So I think we are where we are. I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think the response is pretty comprehensive.
Sorry, we've got noise here.
I think that's possibly Councillor Thomas, who's joined by phone. I just wanted to say that everything that has come out in this discussion this evening, I think, is already in the response, Chairman, and I wanted to give you confidence that that was the case. So I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Mark,
for that.
Could I also confirm?
Sure.
In terms of this, you asked the question about City Deal, which is the reason why that I always put. I've started to put for the last several months now the minutes of the City Deal on the council agenda for information, so that people can pick it up if they want to, because it's on the agenda of the cabinet. What I've also done is talk to Kelly Byrne and her colleagues, and we will be bringing her to a council meeting to discuss the functions of the City Deal. It's the problem we've had is the pandemic, to be honest, and getting something like that on the agenda, because quite often things like the next one, we've got things like budgets and whatever to take. So it has to be somewhere where we at least can have some debate if you need it, and over time. In terms of the CJCs, there's been negotiations going on with WLGA. I can send you a copy of everybody a copy of what's been submitted. It was in fact they've only been submitted in the last week or so, to be honest, just before the deadline, all of them. And indeed, there was one from where else was there from? Well, WLGA was the main one, I think. And there's always been this concern, and I know that there's been concern from some members, particularly one of the northern members, that they don't agree with the system at all. But if you look at the City Deal, they do a hell of a lot to do at the moment to do with economic development. There's an element in there which Vicky will be coming on to in terms of the strategic development plan, because that's actually that's already gone through the City Deal. So that's the planning element. In terms of the WLGA, they currently hold the highways sections, which are dealt with on a regional basis already. So there's a lot of this is not new, but being formalised into a different structure. Now, there's a question you've got to ask yourself, is that whether or not, for example, you could actually put some of this through the City Deal organisation. Is a possibility you could do that, and that needs to be debated. The problem we've had is that the Welsh Government has been hell-bent on putting it through anyway, and that's now gone through. How it's going to develop, I don't know, because one of the points they talk about is that they're going to have to have the first meeting by September. That doesn't mean you're going to actually formulate anything by September, and I possibly would suspect that if you consider that the Welsh Assembly government have elections in May, we then go to this initial stage in September. I cannot see anything functioning properly until after the next election of local government either, to be perfectly honest. But a lot of the functions they're talking about currently are already dealt with regionally anyway, and that's why, to be honest, some of the stuff that we put in has covered all the issues that everybody's talked about. It has put a hell of a onus on the leaders of the authorities. There is the possibility of putting substitutes in, and that's one of the things that currently happens. For example, with the highway sections, is that our cabinet member for highways transportation goes to that particular meeting. I don't go to it, and that's the way that I think it's going to function. I think. But until it's formalised properly, and it won't happen until at least September, then it's going to be difficult to do. Everybody was been pushing and pushing and pushing, but you've been pushing on an open door. I tell you that for nothing, right? And in essence, everybody has said everything that's been said tonight, all of the time. But we are where we are. The Assembly has actually passed the legislation, albeit it's got to get royal assent, and we've just got to kind of work with it to the best ability. One of the things we've always said is this should not be a substitute for local government, and I hope it won't be. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. I mean, I do like what Councillor King's point was making about these are areas where we know funding is limited in Welsh local government, and if there's additional funding, then fine. But if there's not additional funding, if it's top slides from our funding, which I'm really concerned about, and we're developing another tier of bureaucracy, then I see little point in having them, to be quite honest. But I see some logic in some ways to it, especially with the metro project going ahead.
Yeah, one point that hasn't been mentioned yet, because it's something we pushed through the WLGA and through the leaders' meetings, is that the Minister has agreed that setup costs are going to be paid for by Welsh Government.
Okay.
So, but then it's the own costs of the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Rob, do you want to come back or any more comments, or are you kind of finished?
No, I think we've covered it, Chair. I think we've had a really good airing of this. It is as members have indicated, it's been around for a while. It's the direction of travel. I'm at the risk of repeating myself, but there are issues with it around costs, around duplication, around capacity and resilience, and also around if it's going to be done, do it well or don't do it at all. And those are the issues that's in the response for you. They're already there because they've already been rehearsed through the cabinet meeting before Christmas.
Okay, before I wrap this up, has any member got any more comments to make? No, I got no indication. Can I thank you very much for that element of the presentation, Rob? I think it's very illuminating and interesting to see where we are in terms of CJCs. I mean, I think the comments we make could be referred back to Welsh Government that we made tonight. Obviously, I'll discuss that with Karen when I see that, but I'm happy to move on to the next item, which is on performance. So we get back to the presentation, please. And I think Tom's taking this now, isn't he?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if Matt's able to share the presentation, that would be really helpful. Is that appearing on your screens?
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, okay. I'll just while Matt's sorting that out, I'll just give you a bit of background. Part 6 of the bill is about performance and governance, and this is a part of the bill which is seeking to streamline and simplify some of the arrangements around corporate performance reporting. We've worked together with the WLGA as local authority and Welsh Government to develop the guidance. The reason for Cabinet referring this on to you is because Welsh Government are currently consulting on the statutory guidance that will accompany it. The deadline for the submission is the 3rd of February, so the views of committee this evening will help inform that response. The idea is that these arrangements should demonstrate the council exercising functions effectively. It draws more attention to economic, efficient and effectiveness of how we're using our resources and making sure that we're governed effectively. And I know Debbie mentioned some of the changes earlier to the Audit and Governance Committee, so I'll concentrate on the performance aspects here. So the idea is that this updates the legislation around performance so that it dovetails more neatly with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And if we can move to the next slide, please. It introduces 5 new duties on the local authority. So it initially, the first is about keeping performance under review. And what I should say is that this is repealing the Local Government Measure 2009. Much of
can I just come in? There's a lot of chatter on here. Can I please refer anything to the actual discussion? Vicky, we will discuss your report after this one. Okay, if you want to move on, Tom, please.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. I didn't spot that we'd skipped that.
Yeah, fine.
Item. Sorry, Chair. So the first duty is around keeping performance under review. That's about us making sure that we are demonstrating how we're using those resources and functioning effectively. The second duty is around consultation on our performance. It sets out that we have to consult once a year on our performance, and it's for the first time it stipulates the range of people and organisations that we need to actually undertake that consultation with. I should say to committee that we currently already ensure that we are consulting with all of the people that the guidance sets out currently, so so there's no change there. And then if we move to the next slide, please, Matt. The third of the duties is around reporting on performance. Members will know that we currently produce a self-assessment report for each financial year. Our report already reflects the future generations and the local government measure. So the idea of this is that we bring those things together, which currently we already actually do, but not all councils do this, and we have to present that report by October of the year following the year that the report refers to. So there's not an awful lot of change up until that point, other than in some of the this kind of detail. But the fourth of the new duties is a departure from where we currently are, and this is the duty to arrange a panel assessment of performance. And what the bill sets out is that once in every electoral cycle, Cabinet determine the timing of this panel assessment, which is undertaken by a mix of local government members and local government officers, either present or retired. There will be a cost which needs to be met by the local authority, and it's down to the local authority to identify the panel assessors and to undertake the commissioning and to then support the panel's work. And then the fifth duty is actually about responding to that panel performance assessment report. So once the report is produced, that report needs to go to the new Audit and Governance Committee and then on to Cabinet, and that sets out our response to undertaking any of the findings of the assessment. So duties, and if we move on just to the last. Great, thank you, Matt. Sorry, Mike.
You're having problems with your sound, Tom? Tom?
Wish to do that as well. So the report that you've got.
Tom, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I think you've got some issues your end, Tom.
My connection is not doing very well. I don't know if that's any better.
Foul weather outside, and I think it's disturbing lots of issues, causing lots of issues at the moment.
I'm hoping that's better.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it is the particularly poor weather in Penarth this evening causing my connection to be bad. So my apologies. So that sets out what the new duties are under the bill in terms of performance. The report that you've got referred from Cabinet gives you a copy of the guidance and also the consultation response that we are seeking your views on as a committee this evening. The response that we're proposing to submit is broadly supportive and encouraging of the simplification that this would introduce. It does draw out some attention that we think WLGA ought to work with us as local authorities to develop some standard guidance around panel assessments, composition, terms of reference, those kinds of issues, so that we don't have 22 organisations doing the same thing in multiple ways. And it also draws out, in particular, the issues that Debbie was raising earlier in terms of composition of the Audit and Governance Committee with a third of the lay members, and also the chair being a lay member, and that will need some careful consideration and support when that's introduced. So that's a brief overview of the report. It would come into effect in terms of the annual report being published in the autumn of 2022 for the retrospective 21-22 year, and panel performance assessments would be introduced after the local government elections of 2022.
Thank you. Has anyone got any points to make on talk about this, about the performance panels at all? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's obviously a very interesting development to consider both in the panels and as they said, the Governance and Audit Committee, the role of external experts and how they draw together. I think a very interesting process to follow that I'm not sure is quite as straightforward as maybe the architects of the Senedd legislation might think it is. So I'm given the number of regulatory bodies with whom local authorities already engage, I'm interested just to wonder if Tom has any thoughts on what they're anticipating will be the outcome of doing this. I think it's clear from many of us are already on the audit of this in this committee, are also on the audit committee. We double job in that, and it's an interesting experience. I think it'd be helpful having a larger number of lay members, because then the required training and immersion of those members in council work will become more clear. I think it's quite obvious from some discussions that we have in the audit committee that myself, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Carroll and others, we're already well versed in what's going on in other parts of the council in a way that a lay member is maybe not so automatically aware of what's going on. And I think it's a very, there will be a period of consideration and lesson learning as to the training required, or the what's required for keeping those people up to date with what's going on in other parts of the council. So I'm interested. It's the relationship between that new governance and audit committee and the panel assessments with what's going on, and I think it'd be interesting to see how that develops in a way that doesn't involve duplication or excess work, and actually finds a meaningful outcome at the end of it. So I think there's a long pathway forwards, and I'm not yet clear from from the information here as to what it is they really think will be the outcome of that when we already work with so many regulatory bodies, Audit Wales, etc. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll keep this quick because I'll otherwise just be rehashing a lot of things I've already said in Audit Committee. But I share a lot of Councillor Johnston's concerns. I perhaps take a slightly different view in that I think there are benefits to having more lay members on the committee, particularly since they tend to bring a level of expertise that perhaps elected members don't bring. But I would just like to emphasise the fact that there does need to be a proper training provision put in place. I think there need to be clearer sort of guidance as to how this is going to operate, and I think that basically it needs to be tidied up is probably the best way, because it's all very well sort of putting forward a suggestion as to how we're going to do it, but you've got to think about how these things are going to operate in practice, and more importantly, operate effectively in practice. That would just be my take on it.
Thank you for that. Open to any other member. Okay.
Can I
Neil, do you want to come in? Yeah,
yeah,
by all means.
It all sounds very good and well to get more and more lay members, but it is really, really difficult to do that. I think we found that out in the past, and I have a fear, wrong word, I suppose. It's not a fear, it's not really. It's a concern more than anything else. Is that we will get the same people over and over again in multitudes of counties, because I know that happens already in some areas, and it is difficult to get the right person to come and do that job, and to and you know the difficulties we've had in getting lay members anyway. because a lot of people, one, don't want to come forward, and those people who do, sometimes they're doing more than one job, because I know that we've had some people in the past who've been on different status committees, for example. So it is an issue, and if we're going to do it, and the only way to do it is to actually have a proper trawl, and then when we get those people, we have to have the proper training, and that's going to cost us money too. So it is an issue, I think we have to address.
I think you made a good point there, Neil. I think one of the issues that I have with all this is not only just finding the people, but also what about their conflicts of interest as well, and their declarations of interest. I think that is very important to know about as well. And also, who's going to scrutinise those people as well? Who's going to scrutinise those panels? Which is another issue that needs to be looked at as well. And where do they come from? So, you know, there are a number of issues. Councillor Cowell, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd just make one point really. Mr. Lewis is currently the lay member on the committee, and I think that he brings an enormous amount to that committee. He brings a level of expertise, and I suppose a lot of that is helped by the fact that he's been on the committee for some time, and perhaps somebody new coming onto the committee may not be as accomplished in that. But yeah, I just that's basically the reason I think that more lay members would be a good thing, is because I've had the experience of Mr. Lewis and think that he brings a lot to the committee.
Thank you.
Chair, I wasn't talking about individuals. I was talking about the principle.
Yes.
Because we've been very, very lucky in the Vale of Glamorgan, but I know that other authorities have not been so lucky, and they haven't been able to get lay members. And it is a difficulty. That's what I'm saying. And
it is.
You have to make sure you have the right character with the right principles and all the rest of it. It is difficult. We've been very lucky, I have to say.
Debbie, do you want to come in?
Yes, all I was going to add is I think it's absolutely crucial that we put in place the appropriate qualification criteria and a robust interviewing process, with all those questions being picked up, such as conflicts of interest, and that's an approach that we adopt for the Standards Committee. But you know, it really does need you know, a lot of time and energy being put into that, but it can pay dividends, and you can end up then having some really high quality independent members, lay members.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Are we happy to note this and to put those additional comments through as well to the consultation? Okay. Are happy? Yep. Fine. We're now moving on to Vicky's report at last. Okay. So apologies, Vicky. There was a bit of confusion about when you're going to have the report. Okay. So over to you, Vicky, now about basically the one concerning the overall development of spatial plans, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Okay, so this consultation obviously has run alongside the Corporate Joint Committee consultation, but dealing specifically with strategic development plans. Just in terms of a bit of background and context, the idea of a regional strategic development plan was introduced in the Planning Act in 2015, but was handed over to local authorities to get on with it at the pace that they wanted to. And as a result, none have come forward in Wales yet, despite Welsh Government pressing for them to come forward over that period. And the closest we got was our region, the South East Wales region, through the City Deal project, you know, trying to bring that project forward, because we do see the benefits in regional planning and the synergies and efficiencies that can bring about. And members may recall that a report was considered by full council, I think it was June 2018, where endorsement of a proposal to prepare a strategic development plan was agreed by council at that time, and it was agreed by 8 out of the 10 councils in South East Wales. with the exception being Cardiff and Newport, who had agreed to the principle of it via their leaders on the Cardiff Capital Region when it was considered. So we were nearly there, and then Welsh Government introduced these proposals about corporate joint committees and started talking about the regulations around that, and made it clear that they would supersede the current regulatory framework for strategic development plans. Hence, that work was then basically put on hold pending what was happening with the corporate joint committees, and no work has been done beyond or since that report back in 2018. But needless to say, that report then, many of the issues are still relevant now, and the benefits and good things about doing a regional plan are still, I think, relevant. But we're now faced with a slightly different governance arrangement and so on than the one that we were potentially looking at under the previous regulatory framework. The report that you're considering today and the consultation proposal doesn't, unlike the CJC stuff, it doesn't actually, that no draft regulations have been prepared yet. It is a consultation document for the sort of policy framework and principles around preparing an SDP that Welsh Government are seeking our views on. So they ask questions along the lines of the format and the process of taking an SDP, and those largely mirror the same process and procedures for local development plans. So similar levels of community engagement and preparation of consultation documents, and then examination in public at the end of the process, the same as our local development plan went through. Our consultation response really flags up a number of considerations and issues that we want to bring to Welsh Government's attention that we feel are particularly pertinent, and a number of those have already been discussed this evening in relation to governance and resources. When we were discussing the corporate joint committees in general earlier, and those are equally relevant to the specific development of proposal for a strategic development plan. There are some quite key land use issues, and all members here, I'm sure, will be aware of the controversial nature of land use planning, and how contentious that can be for our communities and how it affects them, and trying to scale that up to a regional level but yet make it relevant to our communities, and so that they understand the implications of what's being proposed is challenging. And in particular, our consultation response, I think, makes the point time and time again that this is not a process that can be rushed. Welsh Government have set out in their proposals that they expect the SDP to take a similar amount of time as LDPs, i.e. 4 years, which is their sort of target date for dealing with an LDP. Now, that's quite a big assumption, given that very few local development plans in Wales hit that target. Some took far longer than that to go through that process for any number of reasons. But I think even putting that aside, even if you thought that an LDP realistic timetable was 4 years, I don't think the same can be said of an SDP, given the level of engagement and consultation that needs to be undertaken, not only with the public at large, which is going to be challenging in its own right, but also, consultation with host principal councils and the engagement that you all referred to and talked about earlier in terms of the corporate joint committees things. So they're all, I hope I can give you some assurance that those are all issues that we are very alert to, and that we are flagging with Welsh Government officials when we meet to discuss these proposals, and that we've flagged officially through our consultation response that's been submitted, and will continue to do so. Nevertheless, there are some benefits to doing strategic development planning that will make local development planning better and easier in due course. There are some efficiencies to be made there if it's done properly. And, no doubt strategic planning is essential to make sure that we support the economic growth ambitions of the Cardiff Capital Region. It is naive to deal with development planning in isolation in your own local authorities, and particularly in our region, where there are such dramatic interrelationships between the local authority areas in terms of transport, housing and economic development that really need to be teased out through a regional plan. So, cautious support for the principle of it, but just raising some real concerns with the process and making sure that's done and represents local interests.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Open to members. Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I mean, as earlier, I have concerns over the SDP and how it will work in practice. But I think many of those concerns are set out in the consultation response here. I think it's fair to have strong concerns about the resources, the timing, and I think perhaps my concern, one of my other concerns, is just the interaction between the SDP and the LDP lights, or people's work towards new LDPs as many of them run out. Many of them run out, I think, in this year, don't they? So they've already started work on them in a number of different local authorities. So I think there's a concern that some of the benefits of the earlier work have dried up as a result of this as a delay. So I mean, I'm supportive of the consultation response, even if I'm not 100% supportive of the principles that underpin the SDP. Thanks.
Okay, open to other members. All right, I got some questions then. Obviously, one of the issues that I'm concerned about is obviously we've got our own local development plans, and now we've got strategic development plans. And do you think the local development plan will be strangulated by the strategic development plan? Because it feels as though it might be. That's my first point. My second point, I know we haven't got a page number, but on question 3, you talk about pins. What are pins, by the way? Okay, PINS. Because I was wondering, I thought, what on earth is pins? I know what a pin is, but I don't know what that kind of pin is.
Yeah,
so I wonder if you could answer those.
Mark.
All right, you tell me. Go on then, Vicky.
Councillor Wilson, you always get me on whenever I use an acronym. I always try and put the full version in, but I think you always spot them. It's Planning Inspectorate. They're known by us planning geeks. They're known as pins, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, then. There must be a book of this somewhere.
Yeah, there must be. I'll have to make. I'll certainly have to do one, a glossary of terms. On the point of the sort of relationship with the LDP and the duplication, and I think you called it strangulation of the LDPs as a result of the SDPs, and there will definitely be some elements that are currently in LDPs that will go up the ladder to the regional plan. So as an example, strategic housing figures. So currently, Welsh Government set population projections as to how they expect our population projections to grow, but it's down to each individual local authority to determine what that means, how that translates into housing numbers, and how you calculate how many houses you need to build in your local area. Which means that each local authority does it slightly differently, uses slightly different methodologies and so on. The regional plan is likely to undertake that work at the regional level, which makes more sense in planning terms because the regional population pressures are very much that. And if you leave it just down to individual local areas, then places like the Vale of Glamorgan, where there's a lot of pressure for development, can face, very stark demands for new housing developments. Our current local development plan sets very challenging housing delivery targets. Certainly, when you look at it on a regional picture and in terms of what's been delivered in our area compared to other areas in the region. And there are, many of the sort of valleys authorities would like to see far more housing growth in their area than they have had, and so on. So that regional apportionment to meet demands and needs will be done at that regional plan level, so that by the time you come to the local development plan, you will have a headline figure of the number of dwellings that you need to provide through your local development plan. And similarly, the SDP would give an opportunity to allocate strategic development sites, but very large development sites. So The only one I would possibly put in that framework in our local development plan and by way of context would be Barry Waterfront, where we were looking at circa 2,000 dwellings. You know, the smaller 500 dwellings, like Roos Point and Cog and the Cosmeston sites like that are still most likely to come down to the local level and to be determined here. If there was a proposal for a new settlement within the region, again, that would be something that you would expect to be dealt with at the strategic development plan level. But lots of this is still to be teased out. Welsh Government haven't published the guidance. You know, whoever goes first will be the first in Wales to do a strategic development plan. And so it's kind of finding your way as you go along, I imagine.
So we are talking about probably 2027 before we get anywhere, really.
Well, I think in the context, I think in the context of corporate joint committees, I think the consultation we heard earlier are due to meet 1st September 2021, yes. Possibly. You know, you're not going to expect really any substantive work to be started on an SDP for at least 6 months after that, I would have thought. Previously, when we advocated doing an SDP in the region, we felt that needed to be led by a regional team and not being picked off by individual officers in local authorities who have got their hands full with their own local development plan work. So just establishing that team and getting the ball rolling, I think, you know, is a good way off, really.
Thank you. And can I thank you for those comments as well, because I think in the appendices, they're very useful. And I think, you know, I would concur with what Councillor Johnson was saying about them as well. Everyone else happy? All right, to move on. And thank you very much for turning up. Nice to see you at Corporate Resources, Vicky. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. See you tomorrow night. All right then. So yes. All right then. So the next item now, I think, is revenue monitoring now.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That's me. So what you have in front of you today is the revenue monitoring for the period 1st of April through until the 30th of November. So the report takes you through the key issues that we've encountered and also reports the impact that the pandemic is having on us, both financially and operationally, really, and the impact that's having on our budget. The position on the budget is obviously challenging from 2 aspects on a financial point of view. One is obviously we're incurring additional expenditure, but also there are issues around lost income as well as a result of what's happened during the last 8 or 9 months. So as I've reported previously, Chair, we continue to claim monies from Welsh Government through the Local Authority Emergency Hardship Grant, and we've been doing that since March. So you'll see in the report that from the period March to October last year, we received over £7 million to cover the additional expenditure that we'd actually incurred as a result of COVID. We make claims on a monthly basis in arrears, which is why the table is outlining up until the end of October, because at the end of November we hadn't actually claimed for that funding at that time. As the report outlines, we've received over £7 million in relation to the end of October. What I can do is update members to say that we made a claim for November for increased expenditure of at £1.5 million, and Welsh Government has actually paid 1.3 million of that. When they look at the claims, they look at them in detail, and they will put some elements of the claim on hold for additional information, which would explain why there's that 200,000 short for November. We also are able to claim for lost income, which we claim on a quarterly basis and not on a monthly basis as we do for expenditure. So for the first 2 quarters of the financial year, we've received just over £2 million in relation to lost income. And the claim for the lost income for that 3rd quarter to the end of December is due to be submitted this Friday. And our experiences on both the expenditure claims and the income claims is that when we put them in, Welsh Government turn them around very quickly and the money comes back into us very swiftly after we've actually put those claims in. In addition, you'll see in the report we've also received other specific grant funding for different elements of spend, and those are detailed at paragraph 2.5 for you of the report, and those total 4.9 million at the end of November. It's important to say that those figures change as well, because as we go in and out of lockdown, we get more money, particularly in relation to the business grants. So that money is still going up really in relation to those grants. You'll see there's a lot of detail in the report by service as usual, and we're currently anticipating that we will have to draw down unplanned use of reserves of 3.4 million in order to balance the budget this year. And just to point out that that's in addition to the £1 million that was already approved to support this year's revenue budget. So as I said, there is a lot of detail in the report which outlines for you the position service by service, and also clarifies for you where we've been claiming money in order to address the issues that we're dealing with as a result of COVID. What we have done this year, which is unusual, is report on our council tax collection every time we bring our monitoring reports to you, because obviously our collection rates have been impacted by COVID. And at the end of November, as compared to the same period for the previous financial year, there's a reduction of 1.2% in our collection rate, which equates to a loss of 1.1 million. As I've outlined previously, we do have some residents in the Vale who have opted to make their 10-month payments for the last 10 months of the year as opposed to the first 10 months of the year. So we are hoping that some of that income will come in during February and March. We also outline in the report that we did halt our recovery process as well on council tax early on in the pandemic period. We have now restarted that. But obviously we are dealing with that on a case-by-case basis, because circumstances for individuals in the Vale have changed significantly in the last 9 months. So we are working with people in relation to our recovery, and Welsh Government continues to monitor recovery rate, collection rates across Wales, and takes that information from us on a monthly basis. And when we set the budget for the current financial year, there were savings targets in there of £247,000, and at the current time we're anticipating that those will actually be met this year, but as always we will continue to monitor them now right through to the end of the financial year. So we're asking you really to consider this report, and I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, open to members. Anyone got any questions at all? And Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Karis, and thank you for staying around for 2.5 hours to discuss this with us. A couple of quick questions, some of which are related to the points I think I've raised before. So firstly, you're talking about council tax recovery. I'm just wondering how that's the situation for recovery from last financial year, 2019-20. Is looking compared to normal years, if that makes sense. So those who've already in arrears, has that been more difficult for us to ensure collection in this financial year, and is that having an effect also on the amounts of money that we've been able to take in? Secondly, a question that lots of money is flowing through the business grants. I'm just wondering, sort of what are there any fraud controls or occasions of people trying it on or things like that? Do we have a handle on whether that's all going as well as it should? And thirdly, just the point I think I've raised in this meeting a couple of times, which is that we're looking at here usually at the 240 odd million that's sort of council budget, but there's an awful lot of money that flows through our services, and I've asked for whether there's a report or just comments on that, and just when we might get an understanding of how service revenue etc. is being affected. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Karis.
That's okay. Do you want to respond, Karis?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. First of all, on the 2019-20 recovery, we stopped all recovery processes back in April, May, and then started them up again. We can progress more with our 2019-20 arrears than we can with our 2021 arrears, on the basis that the older arrears may well have already been to court, and we have the necessary arrangements in place to be able to chase those debts. But we don't have those in place for the current financial year because the courts haven't been meeting. In fact, we did have a court date for January, but because of this more recent lockdown, that's been delayed now until March. But we do have arrangements in place for 1920. But again, we're very conscious of individuals' personal circumstances as a result of this. So whereas we are starting up the enforcement work, it's still very much on a case-by-case basis, even if that relates to 2019-20. Yeah. In relation to business grants, you're right, there's a lot of money gone out in relation to business grants, and some of the, depending on the type of grant you had, some of the process was automatic. So if they were on small business rate relief, some of those payments went out automatically. In other areas, we have looked at supporting information. So particularly the ones for NNDR, we have a system in place where we're checking bank account details, etc., to make sure that payments can't go out fraudulently. For the NNDR ones, obviously they had to be on our system in order to be eligible for the grants anyway, so we had a check. So we have done checks as we've gone through, and audit have done subsequent checks for us once we've put a lot of the grants through, and there's been very little areas of concern around that, which is positive, because I know in other areas of Wales there have been significant concerns around fraud. So we tried to cover that off by checking it through some of our check-in systems, but also asking where we think something doesn't look quite right, asking for additional supporting information before we release any payments. And then sorry, on the third element that you raised, can you just clarify for me what your question was on that, really?
It's regarding sort of the services that the council provide and for which they're paid, and whether there's been reductions in the amount of money that we've been getting in because of that, or increases because maybe some areas are performing better. So I mean, there's reference, in the reports to, I don't know, some of the registrar services or building services where there've been fewer, where there's been a reduction in income.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at that across the piece. Sort of that, in terms of the paid services that the council receive in, and what the impact of COVID and the and lockdown, etc., has been upon our income and expenditure. Have there been savings? Because actually we haven't been needing to use people to do those things. Have there, or buy in things? Have we received more money because people have been reliant on certain items? I don't know. I'm just, there's a substantial amount of money that comes in and out of the council. Yeah. Feels different to the budget and the way that we talk about the budget, and I just want to, we're talking about, there are this expenditure here, this grant here, there's savings here, but there feels a big element where I don't feel that I've got the the bigger picture. Have there been people, has there been reductions in payments, for example, for personal social care, where people have said, oh, I can't afford this now, or doing something differently. I'm just trying to get a handle on that wider impact upon the council, and whether there's been any work done on that, so to understand differences in services.
I do recall you asking this at the last meeting, and I think what I undertook to do was have to do some analysis of some of the returns we've done, because when we do our claims, whether that's for lost income or additional expenditure, they are quite granular actually for Welsh Government. They want them broken down to quite an extent. So what I could do for you is go through some of those and give you an idea of the areas where we've obviously seen an increase in expenditure, but where we've got the lost income as well, so that you can see. Is that what you want to see, really? Would that help if I did some, or we did some analysis of our claims to date, and I could circulate those to all the committee members then?
That would be good.
Yeah. Okay, I can do that.
Okay, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question, Carys, in relation to the hardship fund, and in particular regarding the items that the council claimed for that were disallowed. It would just be interesting to have some background information on the impacts that those disallowed items have had on the budgets. And I see that moving further down the table, fewer items have been disallowed. Is that because you've got better at gauging what's acceptable and what's not? It'd just be good to have some background on that.
Yeah. Shall I answer that one now, Chair?
Yes, by all means.
I think there's some detail in the report around that. So in ICT, for instance, we weren't the only authority who had to spend significant monies at the outset to upgrade our ICT. And so the decision was made by Welsh Government after the first claim, I suspect, where we all put that money in, that they would only fund 50% of the ICT costs until the end of June. And after that, we've had to pick up 100% of those costs ourselves. So what you will see, I think you raised, didn't you, Councillor Carroll, that there seems to be less difference between what we claim and what we receive back as we've gone through the year. And I think that's because the criteria in place for which we can claim has been refined as we've gone through the financial year. And once Welsh Government have said they're not going to refund us for any ICT issues, then we've stopped claiming for them. They've also been the issue about if an authority makes a local decision, they say that the authority has to pick up the cost for that themselves. So the example that we have locally is, if you'll recall, early on we made a decision to pay a 10% uplift for some of our frontline staff. And also for staff in the independent social care sector, and Welsh Government deemed that to be a local discretionary decision, and therefore we haven't been able to reclaim any of that money. So that in itself has cost the authority, I think, just over £900,000 that we've picked up ourselves. It was a local decision, so we've picked it up ourselves.
Come in on the uplift.
Yeah, sure, go on.
And Caris.
Yeah.
Question. When the decision was taken to provide that uplift, was that taken on the assumption that it would be claimable, or was it taken on the basis, well, it's something we're going to do, if the Welsh Government will provide it, great, but if not, we accept that we'll foot the bill for it?
It was the latter. It was that we wanted to acknowledge that certain of our staff out on the front line were at a higher risk. Really, they were continuing to deliver their services and out, and we there were issues around whether or not they could socially distance actually doing some of the work that they were doing, and the decision was we will claim for it through the hardship grant. However, we acknowledged that if it wasn't going to be repayable, then the council would pick up that cost. So we did try and claim it early on, but it wasn't accepted by Welsh Government. And so we always knew that there was a possibility that we would have to pick up the cost. But from the council's decision, it was decided that that was the appropriate thing to do at that time.
Thank you.
Does that answer your query? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you, George. Gwyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've got to remember what a hugely difficult year we've gone through, and are still going through it. And quite honestly, without the good staff that we have, we wouldn't have got through this year, and all the residents of the Vale would have been really desperate. I mean, I think it's absolutely wonderful that all our staff have really got cracking and done their jobs. You take the dustbin boys out every week, cracking on with their work, and quite honestly, just think of the mess on our streets if we hadn't had these people go to work. All the social service workers, you know, looking after the elderly. I think it's a fantastic amount of work they've done, and I commend them all. And I think the fact that we have taken this money on board ourselves, okay, so be it, we've done it. I'm glad to be part of a council that looked after their workers than a council that hasn't. And I think the Vale Glamorgan administration have got to be commended for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Can I concur with the comments made by Councillor John on that? And can I also thank you, Caris, for this consideration, considering where we could be. I think 4.5 million overspend, considering where we are, is fantastic, really. Really, and I've got one question to ask though on 2.18 about building services. mean, obviously, you know, we got an overspend here of £750,000. We understand that. We understand the reasoning for it. But equally, what I'm concerned about is moving forward, because obviously, with the number of jobs need to be done, especially in housing in particular, for next year and whatever. Given we're still delivering elements, you know, of the housing quality standard, admittedly, the communal areas and those sort of areas, and we understandably so, we can't deliver them now because of COVID. But next year, if, say, for instance, we're in a better situation, and fingers crossed, I hope we very much are, that clearly have we got the resilience there in that area, considering these people have got very particular, got lots of transferable skills to other areas, to other jobs. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, you know, have we got that capacity to go forward? And if not, what do we plan to do about it instead?
I mean, I think to reassure you, there is still the capacity to go ahead. I mean, that workforce is still intact, and those staff are still with us. I think during the pandemic, where we've been able to, they've supported in different areas of the service where they've not been able to undertake their substantive role, if you like. But certainly that workforce is still intact and can pick up the work that they would ordinarily be doing as soon as they're able to do so.
Okay, I can't see any other comments made. Okay, and we note the revenue budget and refer it, and it's been referred. So thank you. And now we move on to capital now, Caris.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Again, this is reporting for you the capital position for the same period, so the beginning of April till the end of November. The pandemic again has had an impact on the capital programme. I think we mentioned last time that we did stop tendering for capital schemes early on in the pandemic, as we didn't know whether or not contractors would be able to actually undertake the work, whether or not their supply chains were reliable, and whether or not they'd be able to meet the timescales that they'd contracted to work with us for. This position, however, was reviewed and contracts have been tendered and works are being completed during the year. Really, with regard to the tendering process, we tender where we've done a sort of a risk assessment as to whether or not we think that work can be done and what the impact of COVID will be, and work with the contractors on minimising the impact of that. So what the report does for you is outline in quite a bit of detail what's happening on the capital programme this year, and it does give some details around, we've had some more Welsh Government grants coming, so we've increased the programme to reflect those. There's the use of Section 106 monies now reflected, additional monies, and also what you are starting to see now is some slippage from this financial year into the next financial year. And some of that is just, there are some capacity issues in teams where staff are working hard on a number of different issues to support COVID and haven't had the opportunity to move these schemes forward in the way that maybe they would have done. But also there are, you'll see in the report, a whole range of very genuine reasons as to why some of these schemes are now slipping. And those are detailed for you in Appendix 1 of the report. So I'm happy, Chair, to take any questions or queries people may have.
Has anyone got any questions or queries regarding any of the schemes or anything? Okay, I think we're happy to note that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
okay,
Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
It's 20 to 9. Okay, and I think it's over to you now, Karen.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hopefully I won't take up too much of your time, but I would like to go through the appendices, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
Particularly Appendix A to the report. This is your normal recommendations, decision tracking, so that we can get committee's approval on what recommendations have been completed. I've noted the ones that are completed, so I won't go through them all, but you can see that from the 18th of November, there are items that have been referred to Cabinet. I've left that as ongoing until we know what Cabinet say, and the same for the Audit Wales Reshaping Services Programme review. That's got to go to audit, which is taking place in February, again ongoing. So in relation to the appendices, as far as I am concerned, then I've noted them as ongoing and completed, and it's just for you as committee to be informed and to agree to those. If we move on to Appendix B, that is completed. So I just need all those actions are completed. I just need your views really from committee that you're happy to record them as they are recorded in the appendices.
Are you all happy, members?
Okay,
good.
thanks for that.
Fine.
With regard to Appendix C, this is the forward work programme that was agreed some time ago, and there are some changes coming up in February and March that I would like to highlight.
Yeah.
And of course, from the October committee where reshaping services has slipped, and you will note in there that this will be reported to committee once it's been to the reshaping services board and cabinet, and obviously we'll bring it to committee and it will come back on a regular basis. The next thing I'd like to highlight is the fact that you would have received an email this week. All members have been asked for their opinion in relation to holding 2 meetings in February. We've got a scheduled meeting on the 17th, but as we've been asked to hold an extraordinary meeting to discuss the budget that we have recently had from Welsh Government, and we need to consider that as a committee and then refer any matters back to cabinet. We need to be doing that in relation to timescales. So therefore I've emailed members to say, could we have a meeting on the 11th of February, please, to discuss that, and then with a suggestion that we cancel the 17th of February meeting, and the ADP report that was due to come back to us, which is actually going to go to Cabinet and Council. Are you happy for that to just go through the Cabinet and Council route? And therefore we only have 1 meeting in February on the 11th. But we do have the employee pay policy that we were going to take to the 17th, but that needs to be going back to Cabinet by March to go to full Council in March, and our meeting in March would be after the full Council meeting. So if you're all happy, I'd like to take the employee pay policy with the budget reports on the 11th of February. And I'd like committee's agreement with what they want to do. Do they want to hold 2 meetings or 1 meeting, and what they're happy for? I've had 4 responses, and those responses are happy to just have 1 meeting on the 11th of February, but I would like a full committee discussion on that.
Councillor Cowell, do you want to raise the point?
It was simply going to be to say, Chair, I haven't responded to the email yet. I have seen it, and I'm happy to go with the 4 members who have responded so far and go with the 1 meeting.
Yeah, I mean, we have this. I know Neil has put on the chat about the 11th of being Learning and Culture Committee as well, but I think we can work around that. Karen, do you want to come back on about that point?
Only to say, Chair, that I did check the membership, and of course ours doesn't cross over, and that meeting starts at 5. So our meeting would start at 6. The only other option is that we go for an afternoon of 4 o'clock, which I know that you can't make, and and other members who are working probably can't make either. No. So it's really a decision really of what the committee wants.
I know Vince has come in and said he's happy with the 11th. Councillor John, do you want to come in?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to support whatever Karen wants.
Okay, we did consider it, Leader. We did discuss it,
yeah.
and it came down to the number of members that that weren't on the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee.
No, that's fine. It's just that I didn't have a copy, and I obviously have to put it in my diary as well, but I can do that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, then, so we'll go for the 11th of February.
That's fine.
Yeah.
With regard to the March...
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure, Pam, go on.
I got no problems with that. There won't be any clash for officers' attendance, would there?
Well, it'll be Caris and Lace Bonnie. So Caris, it doesn't go to Learning and Culture. That's another officer from Finance, and I don't think Lace goes very often, and I'm sure if Lace couldn't make it, I'm sure Tracy would cover corporate resources.
That's fine.
Or
maybe we get Tracy to come since Lace came today, if you see what I mean.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can speak to her. Yeah, that's fine. For the March meeting, I just want to point out that in relation to the items on the agenda, can I just reference the fact that the Vale Glamorgan Wellbeing Objectives and Improvement Plan with the annual delivery plan will be one item, not 2 items, and that's just to make a reference. And obviously the council's annual self-assessment, that needs to be deleted. This plan was done some time ago, and that is not now what is, you know, is envisaged to go forward. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and I'll make those changes and upload it to the council's website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
thank you very much. Okay, Councillor Johnson, did you want to come in at all?
Thanks, Chair. It wasn't on the on the date of the next meeting. I've already replied, as you know. I was just wondering when we'll be next able to get a welfare reform annual progress report. Obviously, the impact of the pandemic hits both our capacity to produce reports, but has also had a strong impact upon our constituents and the people we serve. And I just feel if there's an opportunity to get that report, then that would be most welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Harris, do you want to come in on that point?
Well, just to say that I normally bring this report through, Chair. If would committee be happy if I do the budget reports in February, and I'll try and bring a welfare reform one to the March meeting then?
That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay.
That'd be
Thank you.
terrific. Okay.
So moving on then, Chair, if we can look at the reports that are listed on the forward work programme, you will note that a number of them have been impacted by COVID, and I know Councillor Johnson has mentioned the welfare reform. I don't know if there's any others that you'd like to mention, but there are a number of them there that have an impact by COVID, and I'm sure others have also had an impact. But what I would like to say to the committee is, if you've got any particular ones of interest there that you feel you do need to bring forward, please let me know, and then I can arrange with the officers an appropriate time, you know, when any of those can come back.
I think the contact centre might be worth having a look at, because I know there's a triage project going on in Penarth, and that'll be starting. That may have an impact upon the contact centre. So maybe we could talk to Tony Curtis to see if there's feasibility of getting something there, maybe for the April meeting if possible.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay, if there's anything else the members want to discuss, please come back to me. That's fine. We can do it outside of the meeting.
That's fine. I mean, what I will do is probably have an agenda meeting to discuss the full work programme with you, Karen, and invite Pam as well as Vice Chair to come along as well to that.
Yeah,
just
that's
to go
fine.
Through, and maybe have a chat about it possible with officers, maybe get the officers involved in these to see what's feasible and what's not feasible by May. I was thinking in particular.
That's fine, because we're going to be looking to be drafting a new one. Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, obviously. Okay, and can I thank you all for tonight? I know it's been a very long.
Chair, Caris has got a hand up. I don't know whether it's an old hand or a new hand.
It's an old hand or a new hand, Caris?
Sorry, it's an old one.
I got the impression it must be. Okay, can I thank you all for your forbearance tonight? It's been a very long meeting, an interesting meeting, because we discussed some very interesting issues that are coming up in the next couple of years. And can I thank you all for your contributions tonight? Okay, thank you all. Take care and I haven't got no other matters. Yeah. And good night to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Safe, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye bye. Bye bye. Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, Neil.